playing on the actual competitive field. And then if you're a coach, it's like you're not paying attention to the science, the anatomy, the nuances of technique, because you have to get it done, right? So there's the utilitarian, and then there's like the abstract, and you need to really bridge those gaps. And I think that touches on to a significant point that Omar brought up, is that one of the things that makes us a little bit distinct is that we spent a good part of our lives manifesting both. And it wasn't with obviously the specific intent of becoming a clinician until later on, but we ourselves went through the experience of being athletes. And not just, to a certain level, like we went very far, like either touching on the high end of amateurism, right? Or about to embark onto a professional career. And in doing so, it gives you the importance of habit formation and really making movement and technique a habit. And I think that's one of the biggest understandings, like how well, as one of my own mentors, Will Chung, says, like, how pressure tested is your technique? How well can it withstand the rigors of fatigue, competition, stress? And that's what we try to bring to all of our clients, whether they're the highest of the high athletes or executive clients who run through the most stressful of days, or our Gen Pop, right? Because at the end of the day, we're all human. We're all kind of fallible to our own patterns. And so we need to develop strong habits and technique that can handle that pressure of life.
Yeah, I think the biggest piece between the pro athlete, this is the biggest difference in my opinion, that the pro athlete and the novice or the amateur is the nuance. What the pro athlete has developed is that they have been able to get the nuance of their sport and of their body to its peak. And the novice or the amateur has not. Right, they have those skills that continually break down, and they don't know how to recover, or they don't know how to fix them. And so that's where we come in as clinicians to fix those. Right, for the pro athlete, we are simply enhancing their nuance so that they can continue to strive at the top. Right. The reason why LeBron James spends so much money on his trainer and on his medical side of things is because of he wants to continue to keep his nuances at its peak.
The create a resilience.
Right. In the other side of things, the psychosocial aspect of things, as you guys were talking about earlier and about Japan, you have to have a balance, right? You can't just say it's going to be work. And while that may hold up for a certain portion of time, the breakdown at the end of when you want to take your rest hits you really hard. And so we have to say, okay, let's find somewhere to create some free space for us to go after the things that we want to do in our free time. That's really like the cornerstone pieces that we kind of deal with, is keeping those two nuances high, and then your freedom of choice to not be stuck in your profession for too long of a period that's going to ultimately break you down, especially if you're an athlete or in that realm.
Any type of professional, really. That's I guess, like, one of the things of how Omar and I get to be where we are is like what he said, like my full-time gig and my other full-time gig, and that's what it's been for a long time. As when I was an athlete, I was doing that while I was going through college, while I was going through applying to medical school, and then deciding to switch over to graduate school for my DPT. And then I started coaching from amateurs to my professional athletes while I was in my second year of graduate school. And it comes out of passion, right? And, for me, it was my passionate escape. So for me, it actually was my recovery from my studies. And that's one of the important things of having good listening skills, good interviewing skills with your clients, to be able to understand what are the things that stress them out and what are the things that invigorate them, because it might be different. So for me, my makeup was what allowed me to kind of create this duality. And because I have this rush to get there as fast as I can, um, and things from my background as well, that might not be the way that I would advise for everyone. And in fact, when we talk about, when I consult with different people who are in pre-PT, pre-AT, and they want to go into the sports medicine world or strength and conditioning world, I ask those questions like, what do you need for recovery? What invigorates you? Because maybe they might not be able to handle 80 hours of training people. For me, I'm an extreme extrovert, so I like being around people, so it invigorates me. It's in fact Omar who always will tell me, cool down, chill, give your mind some time to just decompress, because I'm notorious for going for like a couple months and then taking 2 days where like I just crash, because that's when my body tells me that I need time for recovery versus, my emotional side needing a recovery from working with people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's a good segue for, I guess, more of the coaching side of things, right? Because, whether you're a clinician, whether you're a coach, you're in the game of behavior change and trying to get outcomes and trying to influence people. I guess for you guys, and I think I may know what your perspective is, but I'm just curious to see what you actually say. Is I see that in the industry, many people try and take the training, the program, the coaching that works for the pro athlete and apply it straight to youth athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And while, we talk a lot about principles, right? Like some principles, they stay the same, but I don't know if many people talk about how those principles are applied appropriately. And I think that you guys have a very principle-based model for how you approach that.
Yeah, so there's different principles, right? Like one is obviously age. Age is one that you have to really take into account. How much stress can like a youth athlete's body be able to handle, and also their attention span, right? And then also as you go through the age spectrum, right? My preference was always to eventually go into professional sports, because that's invigorating for me to be involved in someone's life through hopefully a 20-year career, right? Because if someone gets drafted or starts a professional career around the age of 18, 20, well, you're hoping that you can prolong it until they get to 36, 38, 40. And in that time, there's a lot of changes that happen to them in life, in fame, in how well their skills develop, how their game develops, how their body will atrophy, and how you have to kind of maintain their performance. And those strategies change. So that's something that personally is very exciting and interesting for me. But I guess, again, in development, to get to the place I am now as a professional, I did not just train professional athletes. In fact, I trained all types of athletes. And in my residency, in my clinical career, as well as when I was a strength coach, like I wanted to train as many different types of bodies at different levels of experience and from different sports, to train my eyes, to train my critical thinking, and to also train the way I deliver my coaching. Because the verbiage and the storytelling that you give has to be in a way that that person, the audience, is willing to accept. And you have to meet them where they are. So in that way, it creates the versatility that now, I feel comfortable talking with a hockey athlete, a dancer, a baseball player, a pitch, specifically pitchers, versus all the other position players, professionals, like even in professional MMA, even though people might look at it as just fighting, you have to know, like, some people come from a jiu-jitsu base or a wrestling base or a Muay Thai base, and there are nuances in how they have developed in their background, and there's some commonalities and some very strong differences. So even within MMA, I'll talk to one athlete completely different from another, from their background, and that also includes their cultural background, their training background, and also in the space of life that they're in right now. So one thing that we always talk about is, that's why our team is called Cool Heart. And it comes from a Thai phrase called Jayen, right? Which means that even in times of high emotion, whether it's happiness, sadness, anger, you're able to stay calm, collected, and make the right decision. Right? It's a very common phrase. I got it quite a lot when I was training, because you get to a point of fatigue and stress. And I like it because it leads again to the point of the heart, which leads to empathy, which leads to listening and connecting with the client that's in front of you.
Sorry. Yeah. So this is a major problem that we encounter as clinicians, where we try and take a mold from a higher level and drop it down to a lower level. I've talked to numerous strength coaches in college, in the pros, in high school, and I'll use this example: the ladder. Right, the higher you go up the scale, the more they hate the ladder. The lower you go down the scale, they love the ladder. Okay, it's super simple. Who here, you guys can just wave your hand, has done hopscotch before? Okay, right. So this is my analogy to everybody. If you can do hopscotch proficiently, then your motor skills are built in, right? With the generations that we have now, there's no hopscotch, right? No one's playing hopscotch. And so the introduction of a very difficult drill like a ladder, right? Because it's very taxing mentally on a person who has no motor control. Which is a child, right? They have zero motor control, and so they don't know what they're doing with their bodies, and so you have to train them down. With a college athlete, with a pro athlete, you don't need that, because they should have that skill set of motor coordination already built in. So when you take the ladder away, they should know what to do. That is the issue with why people love and hate the ladder. I love the ladder. I still use it. It still has its use as long as you know what you're doing.
And not confusing it for developing other attributes than what it's actually designed
It's
for.
motor control, right? It's not a speed thing. We're not doing this. I don't want you to be faster. We're working on motor control. If you guys haven't done this, I want you to do this whenever you can. Work with older people, okay? They are set in their ways so hard that when you make a breakthrough with them, you understand. It's Aaron, you're laughing, but it's serious, right? You understand that change can happen, right? And so when you get that older person, and they appreciate it the most, when you get that older person, they go, "Oh my God!" I have a woman right now. She lives and breathes tennis, right? She's got zero rotator on her right side, like. Her doctor's like, "You've got a rotator cuff." And I said, "Okay, we're going to work around this." She could not lift her arm up above her head without getting like a block, right? And so yesterday we worked on a drill, and she was just flying up there like it was no issue. And again, appreciation for the fact that you got them to do something that they couldn't do. Because with a regular athlete, they go, "Oh, that's cool. Thanks, man." And then move on, right? With an older person, you have to be patient, and you have to understand, hey, let's work with you because we're limited at what we're going to be able to do and change, right? And so the smallest change to them, to us, is the biggest change for them. And while I was talking to her yesterday, I said something and I wrote it down because this like made so much sense. So we have to be within the range for change, right? Most people have expanded their range too far out, or their range too far out that they can't change, right? They're trying to learn too many things all at once. And so when you write that whole jack of all trades, those people are great, right? But they're always the people that are in the middle. What we're doing as clinicians, we're pushing people to their peak. So we want you to not specialize, but be proficient in the thing that you're supposed to be proficient in, right? And strong and tactful and all the other things that follow with that. But if you want to become a jack of all trades and you want to make it into the NFL or the pros, or you want to be like the best track and field guy, it's not going to happen, right? Because
Yeah.
like, oh, I want to be good at high jump. I want to be good at the 100-meter. Like, you can't be great at everything.
You have
right?
to take times and segment and grow.
Yeah, Usain Bolt's like a great example of that, right? Usain Bolt, Michael Phelps, right? There are things that they get beat at, right? But they know the things that they excel in, so they excel in those. You know, we're not trying to make you great in everything. We're trying to make you great at the thing that you want to do. And I think as clinicians, we try and ramp up really fast because we see some progress in what they're doing. And it's like, no, we can still slow down. We can still take our time, you know?
And kind of to finalize your question, Aaron, is like, I think one of the biggest mistakes that people who don't work with the top pros make is they don't realize how talented these people can be. Like, you can look at all NBA athletes. I guarantee you 99% of them have never worked on improving their vertical. They are built and talented neurologically. Like, I asked like one of my clients, and I was like, so how much jump training did you do? He's like, I play basketball. What do you mean jump training? I play basketball. You know, and if you were to take that to all people who play basketball, that's not going to work, right? You have to understand like where that person is, what's a low-hanging fruit that I can develop, which is their weaknesses, and then how can I enhance their strengths? And that's what's going to allow them to improve at every stage of their development until they get to their peak. And you know that, so like for NBA athletes, rarely are you really working on how to improve the vertical. They're already really good. And a common phrase that we all talk about, people who work with NBA athletes, is, yeah, you can spend 6 months and maybe improve them by 1%. But that might also put them at risk to an ankle sprain or a knee issue, and they now drop down to 60, 50% right away. So their goal, for the most part, is to actually keep them at their peak performance, not improve them, because they want to maintain their performance, which is very different from what you would have for a youth athlete or a developing athlete, you know, who's in their teens. You want to develop them so that they can achieve that peak so they can maintain. Does that make sense?
Very well said. I want to just give it open Q&A time for the group because I know we wanted to fit kind of like a movement section in. So if anyone does have a question, like feel free to unmute yourself, introduce yourself to Jason, Omar, and then ask your question.
Oh, and one thing that I could just quickly add is, you know, even though we are clinicians first, we are also both strength and conditioning coaches with over 10 years of experience. And so that's something that Aaron touched on, that we have this strong blend, and we have a belief that to be a good, well-rounded clinician, you have to become, to some degree, a decent to a great strength coach. We could touch on to why, but the question's open to all ends.
Don't be shy.
Yeah, talk up, guys. Come on. That's what we're here for. Maybe you're on mute and don't know it. All right, someone give us.
Oh, there
Someone's
we go.
talking.
I said, knowing a lot of something they don't teach you well in PT school is how to take somebody and progress them for, say, 6 to 12 weeks. Write a program that is like a progressive overload. You know, they teach you well, this is a rotator cuff tear. Here are 5 different exercises laterally, right? They don't teach you how to regress well,
Mm-hmm.
aside from, okay, this person's no longer indicated for rehab.
Yeah.
Based on insurance, right? Based on
Yeah.
insurance. So they don't, of course, they still are, but they don't teach you how to, like, okay, well, now what does that look like? It's essentially taught in PT school. That's not your job anymore, because, you know, in terms of the outpatient side of it.
Yeah. You know, so
I'm just saying,
So-
so that's one thing why, to answer your question, Jason, is the programming side of things, knowing how to efficiently and safely progress somebody based on what you're looking at, right? People just like, I feel like a lot of therapists just don't know, was this enough for somebody? Like they chronically underload their people.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they chronically underload, and I think it's part of it is, you know, one of the hardest things I think is there's no roadmap. There's no, and clinicians for sure are so intrigued with the idea of like the new technique that they want to then get into the trap of trying that technique with everyone and trying to figure it out for themselves. And I think that's one of the biggest traps we can go into. Like I would often have from classmates to friends to peers who would always learn something and be like, I have to figure this out on my own.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where it comes from. Is it insecurity to ask the question, or is it coming from an ego that they have to figure it out? But, you know, in sports, we always notice, like, why can I not make this faster by asking people and learning from other people's experiences? Kobe's a great example of this, right? If everyone who's from LA, I know, loves Kobe. I was a big Kobe fan as well. And he's one of the big examples that I studied to try to figure out how to learn faster. If you watch him, even though he knew he was going to be great, right? And there are more and more stories coming out now. You see that and you know, when he was playing, he was thought as very overconfident, very egotistical. But the things that made him egotistical was that he wanted to be great. To become great, he lowered his ego enough to ask everyone questions, from competitors to legends that he wanted to beat. Like you hear questions that he asked Michael Jordan, to reading, learning from all different types of people, to asking bench players as a rookie, which I thought was so phenomenal. And the questions were so nuanced because he wanted to understand, oh, you did that really well. And it might be something that no one else pays attention to. This guy is not, he's an old veteran. He's not playing any minutes. No eyes are on him, but he saw something. He's like, I want to know what that is. How did you do that? Because he knew that if he learns that way, he's going to get farther faster. So I think that's one of the biggest things that we see in our community. It's like a lack of wanting to ask questions, reach out, and really develop the skills of how to become mentored. And I know that's how I got so far. Same for Omar. Like we got mentored, we got coached, and these are long-lasting relationships. Like I started Muay Thai 19 years ago. I'm 33, so it's been in my life for over half my life. I still talk to my coach at least twice a week. not because I necessarily need him, but just to ask, like, what are his thoughts about things. And I do the same practice with numerous other coaches. And we talk about how mentorship could be a touch point mentorship or a long-term mentorship. And I think those are things that often get missed. And then on the technical side, people don't know what the movements are that they're trying to build, and they have a hard time. Like 6 to 12 weeks is really just like, if anyone who's done strength training, that's like the start. You're not even building muscle at that point. 12 weeks is really when you start building muscle. So you 6 to 12 weeks, that's like just the start of their development.
What's really interesting is every major injury we are looking at now as like a year-long process, right? And but like you said, we were only given 6 to 12 weeks, if that, right, due to insurance. This is where the cash-based system comes in really well, is because now we have as long as we want and as long as you can afford it, right? But what we're able to cultivate within less than a year, right, is whenever you get someone and they hurt themselves doing X, you say, okay, so I'll tell you a quick story about a shoulder guy, right? Or it was a back. He came in, he had a back issue, and I was like, oh, what were you doing? He was like, oh, I don't know. Like, so in physical therapy, you get the handoffs as the athletic trainer. So I'd get the patient for the second half, and we'd be going through stuff, and I'm always talking, right? Always like, okay, getting introspective into what is actually bringing this person in here. And he was like, yeah, like my back, my shoulder. I'm like, okay, tell me about yourself, right? And he's like, oh, I got a family, I got a kid, I do this for a job. I say, okay, tell me a little bit more about your kid, right? How old is he? I was like 5 or 6. What do you guys do together for fun? He's like, oh, we throw the baseball around. Okay. I said, let me see you throw a baseball. All right. No offense to the women in here, but he threw like a girl, right? And so I went to the PT and I said, hey, you need to fix his mechanics the way he throws, and everything else will clear up. Sure enough, he started working on the shoulder, and then back pain went away. Okay. It's when we get into the clinical side of things, we are asking the wrong questions because we're trying to get the reimbursement, or we're trying to get this person in and out. Okay. Because we're constrained on time.
And also they might just simply not know that they don't care to ask those questions.
That too, right? Right, exactly, right. The clinician they don't want to ask those questions, right? So it's this is where I come in and I ask all the hard but easy questions, right? It's like, oh, well, tell me about the rest of your life, because now that we have the time, let's do that. And even in in a half hour, you can get more out of a person than in your initial eval when you have to do all these extra questions, right? The doc gave you the prescription. All right, you know what's happening now, so get to work, right? Get to the deep root of what brought this person in here, okay? And then figure out how you're going to make their life pleasurable, not better, pleasurable, right? Meaning they can get happiness now. We're not looking for someone to just get better. We're looking for them to get happy. And we spend too much time on the better and not enough time on the happy, right? Because happy is I get to throw the baseball around with my kid and not be in pain the next day.
One great example is, I realized, how often do you get someone who's like, it's getting hard, whether it's back pain, knee pain, hip pain, difficulty getting up, like especially with older clients, they're like, I can't get out of like the couch or a chair or whatever sitting depth that they're in. And we go, okay, is it a hip mobility problem? Is it a knee problem? Is it a strength problem? Should I do knee extensions? They come up with all these ideas, and I look at their plan and go, why don't just work on sitting and standing a lot and make it at a place that they're not struggling so much, and then slowly increase the difficulty, which in most cases like the depth or the volume of it. And usually that'll clear it up. And it doesn't have to be 6 to 12 different exercises. Maybe it's just finding the right level for them to practice the skill and to understand what they're doing, and then slowly ramp up the intensity or the pressure. And that's the same case with all sports, right? So most people never, we talk about this in our mentorship a lot, that at the crux of it, your exercise should lead to your assessment, and your assessment will dictate your exercises. And it's a constant loop. So even though we're not truly assessing them, like on a clinical standpoint, like, oh, testing their mobility, testing their ranges, you know, what exercise we give them, I'm still watching them. I'm still studying and assessing. Do they need to be progressed? How should I progress them? And what suspicions do I have that then I can pull out and do more specific assessments, because it's dictated from what I'm seeing. And then from those assessments, I go, oh, okay, let's change the exercises. And that might not be changing what movements we're doing. Let's just add a little bit of nuance of load or time duration or something that intensifies and makes them better at the issues they're having.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I just had a thought in my head in terms of, you know, dance and choreography. I feel like a lot of the time, you know, the movements that choreographers prescribe are at a certain intensity, volume, level.
Mm-hmm.
And dancers, which are the consumers, have to choose between, you know, picking to perform a style or perform a piece that may be within reach, may be out of reach, and have to justify, you know, why it would be good for them to take the class. Versus, which is interesting now, I'm seeing a lot of choreographers take the role of these mentorships and having their own individual choreography. But, you know, I always would kind of like would imagine a world where it's like, if you had a choreographer, it's not too terrible to create different levels for one same piece that have kind of these different variations. Because I feel like just how people are following, you know, exercise prescription, they want it personalized. They want it, that's something that's going to fit them and their skill progression.
Yes.
Right. And dance is very much a skill that requires a lot of that motor control, that requires a lot of that coordination. So, I mean, that's these principles that you guys kind of talk and speak about that we learn on like the medical side, and then you learn how it applies, you know, application wise into movement, and then you take that like movement and you apply it into like more conceptual things that they kind of have like an ebb and flow to them.
Yeah, and you know, for Aaron, as you're going through this mentorship now, you know, there's nothing special when you look on paper of what we're covering. Our covering of like what techniques we're actually doing, it's kettlebell basic movements, foundational movements, and body weight foundational movements. The secret of everything is pretty much I'll give you guys our secret. It's a hip hinge or a squat, right? Knee dominant, hip dominant. It's a horizontal push, horizontal pull, vertical push, vertical pull. Know how to do it bilaterally. So both sides loaded, and you're now not having to deal with the rotation, or unilaterally, where you have to rotate or negate that rotation, right? Anti-rotation. And then know how to do it with speed and power. So plyometrics, unilaterally, bilaterally, and then do it with speed and handle it for different energy systems so you can combat fatigue. That's pretty much it. And so when we were looking at even developing that mentorship, we're like, who would want to do this? It's so simple. But we realized over time that it's the nuances that bridge those techniques together, and understanding what it how it connects to our basic movements. So I think a lot of times people get too specific too quickly, and it goes back to want to be personalized. It reminds me of when I first started training as a strength and conditioning coach. As a marketing tool, someone advised me, like, you have to make a baseball athlete specific program versus like a glute or butt building program, or a speed runners program versus a sprinters program versus a golf program. To be honest, for level 1 and level 2, which is like 2 years of the development, 90% of it is the same program, because they don't know how to be strong, they don't know how to be stable. And if they learn how to express those things in these abstract ways, they're going to be better at their sport, and they're going to be more resilient in their sport. So that's one problem that we see quite often, is that they specialize too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
When most people don't need to specialize. In fact, most of the condition that I advise for my professional athletes is to just play their sport. My job in the gym is to make them strong, make them resilient, make their muscles be able to handle it, their connective tissues able to handle it, and also know what their optimal positions of safety are. So that way, okay, everyone talks about like dynamic knee valgus. Should you be able to do it or not do it, right? That's like the major question that everyone says. Like, do you always stay fully neutral? And then some people will say, oh, well, no, you have to dive into knee valgus and get out. That's functional. And for me, it's like, it's not an argument of choice A or choice B. It's how they're related. So if someone is wanting to go into dynamic knee valgus, they have to know where neutral is, where the point of optimal safety is. If they don't know where safety is, they don't know when how early and how far they're going out of the safety zone.
Yeah, same thing with like hyperextension in the legs, elbows.
Yeah, like if someone's always like going into that supreme hyperextension, right, of the knees, well, if they don't know where neutral is to handle like a vertical compressive load, and they're like slightly hyperextended, and they don't know that they're not actually here, they're here, well, if you put a heavy load on them, whether it's resistance from the top, right, like a back squat, or they're jumping and they're landing stiff-legged, well, now you're pliable into more and more extension. That's going to be a problem. So a lot of what we teach in strength and conditioning is first a point of safety. What's optimal loading? And then we can start talking about, okay, how do we accentuate it for your sport? And so you have a good understanding of your body. Because most people who are in professional sports, they know how to be good at their sport. Same thing with dancers. They know how to be good dancers, but they might not know where points of safety are, optimal loading. And it's not to say that we want to make them rigid, but it's just to teach them, okay, this is where your body is best at for these stresses. And now, because of your talent and your skill, you're venturing out of there, and then you have to come back.
Gotcha.
I think the biggest issue in the dance community is there's no middle ground. And what I mean by that is it's like an ego-driven, performance-based, top-tier community.
Like professional sports.
Yeah, right. But it covers the whole gamut of novice. Even the novice want to be the best novice, right? And so when you have teachers saying, oh, this is the dance routine you want to do, and you want it to be on beat and on cue, and you're not hitting those steps, right, you fall to the back. And it's the people in the back that get injured, right? The people in the front are injured, right? But for some reason, we've learned to deal with those injuries, right, through nuance. And, all of the people that I know out here, they dance for, it's their job. So there's no, weakness that they can't show that, right? And if they miss a step, they can't, it's competitive, very competitive. And, you know, like I just hear their stories and I go, that's brutal, the things that you have to go to. And even socially, right? On TV, when you guys are looking at like, it's always competitive. So where do you get to teach things slow? Where do you get to teach things at a pace that others can follow and keep up? I think that's what, and I'm sure Aaron and you guys and your team are doing that, are getting to that point where that's what is being cultivated. We're teaching things so that it is a gradual step up instead of a ramp up. That has to happen. If it's not, and like I said, I know you guys are doing it.
I think there's like a very integral skill that not all coaches and not all clinicians have, but I think they should ideally have, which is the ability to listen and have a conversation where the athlete can become vulnerable. That they can say, this is going too fast for me, or I'm not allowed to show my weakness. Like Omar said, like I have a professional MMA fighter, you know, very well known, who came to me from someone else's referral, and they were like, yeah, everyone says that I can lift this, and they're like, no, you can do it. Whether it's a strength coach, the coach are like, no, just push through it. You can go through it. You can do it. And it's like, okay, I can do it. And they lift the weight. But if you actually look at them and take away their ability to cheat, they can't even lift 15 pounds. But they could shoulder press and find some way to cheat to do 50. Because they're extremely talented athletically. They know how, and what I talk about, like athleticism, usually is that they can cheat through what most people cannot cheat. You know, they don't even have the skill, but they can figure out a way to make it happen. And that's what allows people who are really good performers to become really vulnerable, is because they don't actually have these foundational positions. Like no one taught LeBron, like it's not because of his squatting, his bench pressing, all that stuff that made him who he is. He's very good at basketball. He understands it on a deeper level. It came more naturally to him. You know, doesn't mean that he didn't work hard at the skill, but just certain things clicked. But I'm sure now in his later development, now he's developing like all these other movement training skills like strength and conditioning, so that he has a more robust understanding of his body.
Love that.
Yeah. So and that might come from eliciting that vulnerability to just say like, you feel weak. And if you really get to it, you know, ego is a crazy thing. They might not admit it for a long time, but then everyone has points where they don't feel strong and confident.
Mm-hmm. I think you know, for the sake of time, you know, if you guys want to move on to a kind of like a progression or a way that some exercise techniques that you guys felt beneficial working in your practice with a hip hop dancer, or just like a person in general, to help learn more and develop more of an awareness for their body and what they're capable of. I think that'd be really useful for people to gain a appreciation, understanding of how you guys coach.
Okay. Well, I was talking with Dr. Miguel earlier about how I love the Dancers Are Athletes program, because I think that's one big thing that in the dance community I see a lot, that it's like you're either the arts or you're a sport, and a lot of people don't feel like that they can merge. But I will say this, is that they do merge very well, and it's because we're human, and because all our professional athletes also are working on arts, right? They're all working the art of their technique. So one thing that I found, and I'll talk about this, is that one of the most foundational movements that I have are the squat and the deadlift. I'm going to try to explain this. Let me explain it first, and then I'll frame the camera. So what Omar and I try to bring a lot to in our mentorship is the idea that with strength training and these movements, it is a skill, right? It's a technique and a skill. If you look at sports, like it's not within 30 reps or 100 reps that we get good. And I think all dancers can understand this, right? You're not going to get good with just 100 or even 1,000. It's a lot of reps consistently. And so it's the same thing with all these movements. That's why when we look at our program, we're like, there's not anything special on paper, but it's by design, right? Like those are the foundational techniques that you will learn in strong first kettlebells or, barbell work or exos sprinting. And we just compiled it together and have a better way of conveying certain things, like of the connection through the body. And in that way, that's the technique that we're teaching in strength and conditioning. So what we'll do is we'll talk about this with our upper body and our lower body. And I always talk about this, like the rotator cuff and the traps are like the glutes and the deep internal and external rotators of the hip, that they're analogous, right? Because at our core, as an animal, we went bipedal, but originally we were four-legged animals, right? We use our upper body in some way. So there's a lot of similarities of how our bodies operate. So if you're looking, and I'm going to bring this down to our feet, whether you're deadlifting or squatting or just standing or walking, right? You pronate, you supinate, right? You dorsiflex, you plantar flex. And I'm this is not something revolutionary of what people talk about ripping the floor. You see this in ballet. They talk about, rooting yourself through the floor. Talk about yoga, rooting, and powerlifting, ripping the floor. But at the end of the day, it's all based around how to connect your body into the ground to be able to develop force out. So if I was to take just my hands, I'll do this first, right? The same thing can happen. I can pronate and go through towards my thumb, and I can supinate. Everyone can see that? It all comes from what? Internal rotation, external rotation at the shoulder, which will translate down to the knees or to the elbows. It's analogous to the knees. If you look at that, it makes sense. Hands, very multiplanar. Wrist and ankle go only in a couple directions. Elbow and knee is like, elbow's a little bit more pliable, but are more of a hinge joint, and the shoulders just can go in all directions as well as the feet. So that's where you come from, the idea that the feet and the hips drive everything in the body. So what you guys can do is just first take your body through, let's just go through frontal plane. Just go through all the way outside, all the way inside. So putting all the pressure on the medial blade and the lateral blade of the foot. Just go back and forth. And what we try to do always is to make these skills very basic and drillable. And I love what, one of my mentors, Will Chung, who I mentioned before, he always talks about that. Drill the skill, drill the skill. So our job as coaches is how to develop drills that are simple enough that they can develop the skill. So that's in the frontal plane. Sagittal plane. Just go up on your toes, lift your toes. Up, down. So I'll show from the side. Heel raise, toe raise. Heel raise, toe raise. And for the clinicians in here, that makes complete sense, right? We talk about this as a clinical test. Okay, walk down, walk back, toe walk back, heel walk back, right? Very simple. But those are things to then develop. Then let's work triplanar. We're going to work on internal rotating and pressing through that medial and pronate through, collapse the arch, and then open up, externally rotate, but still maintain through our tripod rooting of the ball of the foot, the fifth toe, and our heel. So when you rotate out, you don't want to lose the ball of the foot. When you rotate in, you don't want to lift through the fifth toe. You want to collapse in and root out. So what does everyone feel when you do that movement? Do you feel that collapsing of the arch? Do you feel your feet becoming more and more awake? Any feedback, anyone?
I feel it in my hips more so, just feeling
Yes.
the internal rotators and external rotators.
Right. So, again, and this is one of the things that where my exercise will help me lead to my assessment. Where do I want to investigate first? Do I want to investigate what their hip strength is? And is that the thing that I want to develop more? Or is it something with their foot, intrinsics, posterior tib, peroneals, tib anterior, right? Wherever that is. And I can then go, okay, that's great that you feel it there. I'm going to investigate that later. But I can continue watching the movement and give them something tangible that they can start working on the skill. Because can we all not agree that doing this, whether it's a foot problem or a hip problem, they're going to develop some better awareness, proprioception-wise. They're going to have better activation of these muscles that they might not normally feel. And then they're going to strengthen through what they feel more confident in. And then our job is then to find what's the weakness that doesn't turn on as well. And then give them more specific nuances to get that. Right? So the next thing we'll go with this is just a little bit more attention around the knees. So when we root, this is something that gets missed a lot with powerlifters as well. And it shouldn't be, because they're the strongest of all the people. Is here, when we internally rotate, and then when we're ripping through the floor, and remember the ripping is, I'm imagining my feet are slightly pigeon-toed, and I'm rotating and maintaining that tripod of first toe or ball of the foot, fifth toe, and my heel. So these are all rotating, but I'm maintaining that tripod. Now, while doing that, I want you to focus on your knees, and the people who have really extendable knees, right, can really hyperextend. Just be careful that we're not trying to, don't use the cue of push back with your knee as far back as possible too literally. So people who have less flexibility, drive that knee as far back as you can. People who know that they can hyperextend, just push into neutral, and I'll give you a different cue. So people who are less flexible, I just tell them simply rotate out, drive their knees back, and until they feel that quad, feel that kneecap drive up. And then relax and internally rotate and collapse in. Externally rotate, rip the floor, drive that knee back, and tighten through their quads. And what they should also start to feel is their hips, if their knees are going behind their hips are driving forward as well. So they should feel their glute max as well, the tightening of the hips as their quads are also firing. And so you're training this skill of how to flex and extend and connect and root through the floor. And that should be something where you feel connected through your foot, your quads are on, your glutes are on, and it's timing together. Now, for the people who have really extendable knees and don't want to drive their knee back as far as they can, I say feel where their middle point is. So bend the knee, straighten the knee as far as you can, bend the knee, straighten the knee as far as they can, and then come to that middle point where their knees are in line with their hips and their ankles. And for people with really strong flexibility in the knee joint, this is an important skill to have. And then I go, once it's in the middle, think that I'm driving through the heel and pushing vertically up. And I should still feel that quad turn on and that hip turn on. Does everyone feel that? And if someone doesn't, hop on and just let me know. That way we can help like troubleshoot and triage through. Tim says yes. Anyone else? Everyone feels pretty much, they feel that connection through the foot, the quad, the hips.
I do, but if, for instance, I didn't, and I do have relatively hyperextending knees, what might you do to help me continue to find that?
Well,
Or
then we'll have to figure out what is a good cueing form for it. So one of the things that we talked about from our very first session with Aaron in our mentorship group is, there's this dichotomy also about internal cueing versus external cueing. And for me as a coach, and I don't really see it as either or again. It's what's best for them to get the situation. So if they don't understand what you're saying by like, oh, drop your knees more or hips back more, it makes no sense. I have to give them a cue. So whether it's a wall to kind of cue them like, oh, that's where you drive your hips back into, or a Swiss ball, or just giving them a visual. That's powerful enough. In a video, especially a live video, which I have done in the past as well, like I've done basically a FaceTime to their phone, where I would FaceTime from the side, and then they're seeing the screen. There's a little delay, so give them that, but they can see and go, oh, like you see how you're overextending? Bring it back a little bit. Bring it forward more, right? Or I could give my hands to kind of give them a direction to go to, but then that can give them that external feedback. And it's powerful because they can see themselves. They can start visualizing what their body is doing. So
That's where mirrors are a great tool.
Yeah, mirrors are a great tool. We all notice in the dance and boxing community because we're always in front of the mirror. But sometimes the problem with the mirror is you're not at the right angle or you can't see from the side. Right? If I'm trying to see something from the side, but I'm looking, that's going to change my movement if it's not rooted in. So that's sometimes where it's really great to have that video because I'm seeing what's coming on from the side, but I'm keeping the neutral position that I want to work in. Now, what we just worked on with the feet, feeling that connection with the quads and the hips, that's going to play in everything that we do with jumping, running. We need that synchronicity of that triple extension and triple flexion. Triple flexion is absorbing the force. Triple extension is creating the force. And that, as Aaron's learning now, goes from a squat, right, which is a sit to stand, whatever depth you are, all the way to high speed acceleration, which I showed him the same position in acceleration is what we just did with the hips, the knees, and then pushing through the calves, through the ball of the foot. So it's in line with the whole body. And everything we do in between is designed to help build that skill of triple extension and triple flexion for shock absorption and power generation. So we would just take this and go, how do we want to train this movement principle first? I could do it with a kettlebell deadlift. I could do it with a goblet squat. I could do it with a single rack goblet squat. I could do it with a back squat. I could do it with a barbell front squat, barbell back squat. I could do it with jumps. It's all about how well they can coordinate everything with the speed demands and the power demands. And that's the magic of how we can prescribe things and meet them where they are. So let's just quickly take this through with the upper body. Because, I think the foot example and the hip example is so well documented, discussed. But we don't talk about it as much with upper body movements. We just talk about the rotator cuff.
Hey, Jason, before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that a lot of our group is heading out because we usually end around like 11.
Okay.
So I wanted to make sure before we moved on to kind of let the group decide if they want to go on and see one more progression, or do you have final questions or want to head out as it is for you guys.
Yeah, I'm here for you guys until 11:30 or 11:25. So
we got the time for those that want to hang out a little bit more. Thumbs up for continue with movement session. Oh, I see a lot of thumbs up. All right, let's see. Well, let's work through the upper body. Thanks, guys.
So the same idea here with like if we do bench press, overhead press, row, anything, right? And I tell a lot of people the push-up, one of the things that we've done that's really great is it helps people across the spectrum, even with people with injuries, is we start at the bottom position. So instead of thinking of the traditional push-up as being like, okay, I'm up here, and then I'm going to drop, and I'm going to come up. I like to start actually, this is the start of the push-up position. Because now it's concentric, they have to time up everything, and then they can lower, they can go up again. And they can take that break in the bottom, right? We can do set reps of 1. But the important thing is, again, is how to root everything. So whether I'm doing it from the bottom of the push-up or a partially flexed position, I can do the same thing with my hands. Let's imagine my index finger is in line with the camera, okay? If I internally rotate or throw away this, elbow cubital tunnel region, right? I'm internally rotating in my shoulders. What happens? I feel more pressure through this part of my hand, right? And then from here, if I externally rotate, bring my elbows to be in line with my knees and bring that cubital area in front. And then we go back in, back out, back in, back out, back in, back out. Now, some people who have really inflexible wrists, they might feel some things in the wrist. Mobility demands, right? You definitely can feel that movement through the hands, but where do you feel the most when you're doing this movement? It's more proximal, right? In the shoulders. Does everyone feel some part of their rotator cuff lighting up? Their lats, right? So if we take that same example, if I'm coming out, yes, my hands have to root. I don't want to externally rotate and lose my hands because now I have no connection. But if I stay connected and I pull in, which is external rotation, internal rotation, when I do this, who feels their lats, their infraspinatus, their teres minor, to get a little bit more scientific with it? Their rotator cuff firing, connecting with the ground. And how often is that movement principle lost when we bench press, when we push up? That connection into the ground, knowing how to then exert force. Everyone knows if you can root here, now you can exert a lot more force vertically because now you're stable. And that is why when we're doing bench pressing, we talk about breaking the bar. When we talk about, if you watch people who do a military press with a kettlebell, they start here and they externally rotate as they come up to the top. So again, these are the movement principles that bridge all these movements together. But they have to be replicated with slow speed, isometrics, high speed, unilateral, bilateral, and build up to be resilient against pressure of force, speed, acceleration, and then against fatigue. And that's why for us, we thought it could be done in 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, and they're like 6 time. As Aaron knows so well. But he hears the same things. And that's the magic of it, is that it's the same principles and concepts. Any questions?
So for someone with wrist problems, with this, because I have a hesitancy to do it, but then I have to psychologically psych myself into it, and after a while it starts feeling good. The pain didn't get worse, but would this be good for not just shoulder but wrist mobility and progression as well? Okay.
Yeah, because now you're making a triplanar. So let's take this back to the example of a joint that we have problems in the lower extremity that has a huge mobility concerns. Ankle, right? Subtalar joint and talocrural joint. Everyone talks about how dorsiflexion is so limited. And usually for people with dorsiflexion limitations, plantar flexion is also limited. Same thing with the wrist. They're usually limited in wrist extension, they're probably limited in wrist flexion. And there's some compression of those tendons because it's just not able to go here because they also can't go well there. And you can see that analogy, right? Wrist and ankle. They're designed to do very similar things. And actually with our upper body, rarely do people do plyometrics. They only do it with the lower body. And with the dance community, that's where I see a lot of the shoulder, wrist, elbow injuries, is that they never know how to shock absorb and explode out with their upper body. And it's such an upper body demanding sport. Taking out the open chain stuff. So yes, this movement does really well. There's a whole bunch of wrist mobility drills that you can go through. And again, it's also bridging. Well, can I do push-ups? Like if they have problems with the full wrist extension, how can I bridge the gap? Maybe I can give them a little buffer so they can work and still root and still work the exercise, but not be in pain and be suffering for it. And then we can bridge the gap more and more and more as they get used to it. Just like when we do a sit to stand, to build the sit to stand to being able to sit to the ground and come back up. Well, I start them from whatever height that they can easily do, and I just lower the box. That's the big secret sauce of how we get people to do deep squats, is literally just keep getting shorter and shorter boxes. And part of that is like not even starting from the chair level. Maybe I raise it above the chair level so they don't get used to hoisting themselves up, forcing themselves up. They can do it smoothly and using their body the way it's designed to be. And then I put a heavy kettlebell in their hands and make them do it again. And then I make them jump out of that position. So it's just same principles.
Thank you. Yeah, because I definitely felt it was more of a psychological exercise for myself, because with the history of wrist problems, that once I like started letting go of that, that's when I was like, oh, okay, this actually feels pretty good. And so me, especially since like in Cairo school, first learning how to adjust, I kind of injured my wrist even more. So then maybe not so much it's injured tissue, more so the like going back to the psychosocial thing for myself and trying to like bridge that and work on just the fear-based and try not to fear just extension of the wrist.
Well, and this is one big thing with the psychosocial with our athletes. It goes up to the very top. Psychosocial is never missing, but it will always change. But the biggest thing to find confidence, especially with movement problems, is through movement. But it sounds so easy, but it's not. It's very easy. Is simple. It's very simple, not easy. So I'll show you how that simplicity works. Just to kind of finish that off to answer your question here, is if I am nervous about the wrist and now I have the load, right? And especially if I do the push-up, there's going to be more load, but I'm in a full push-up position. If I drop down to a quadruped, the load is down significantly. If that's still too much load, maybe I can bring that gap between my wrists and my knees to be less. Or I can continue to sit back more and more and put less and less weight as I go through it. Right? So that's all adjustable. Load is an adjustable variable. And there's so many more ways that you can nuance the movement without changing the movement. So that's one of the things that we talk about a lot in our mentorship, is that too often as clinicians, we're like so afraid of pain and that we don't change the movement to make the load acceptable, right? That's called graded exposure, right? In the pain science world. We just go, oh, we can't do that. We'll find a completely different novel exercise. I'm like, no, don't lose sight of what you're doing. You want to get them better at sitting and standing, you got to get them sitting and standing. But how can you make it less painful? And that could be as simple as standing without pain, tightening their quad, and hip hinging just to the wall for like 2 inches and back. That could be as little as what I'm doing to start. And you'll see some people, when they do those hip hinges for 2 inches, their toes will fly up. They lose their connection to the ground because they don't know how to do this. So you have to find them where they are. And that example is especially prevalent in NBA athletes. So it shows that at even the highest level of performance, it matches what we have with older Gen Pop.
Thank you.
Of course.
All right. I think that's a perfect time to kind of help wrap things up. Thank you both for staying on the additional time to drop knowledge and wisdom and give them a little taste of what it's like to be in your guys' world and inside your guys' head. I think there's a lot. And, throughout this whole mentorship experience, we've covered a lot of things in terms of, dance history to the dynamics of team versus individual approaches and understanding the different variables that add stress to the athlete. I think one way to sum this up, because we're all movement professionals at the end of the day, is that attention to detail and focus and depth of knowledge that you guys bring in your craft, that I hope everyone here continues to develop even after this, because there is, wherever expertise, specialty you are, there's so much depth that you can go into it and value you can bring to others. So thank you guys for giving that back to our group.
And movement professionals, again, is observation and experiential, and you have to train both. You can't have empathy
100%.
if you don't have the experience knowledge.
Awesome. How can they connect with you if they want to learn more?
Well, my Instagram's down and my Facebook's down. So at Team Cool Heart is probably the best way. And also at Kennedy ATC. And I'll send you my email addresses for both for myself and Omar in case they want to reach us by email.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you guys.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. We just want to see the world become a better place.
Always.
Love it. All right. Well, I hope everyone enjoys their Saturday. For those of you in the Discord group, I'll be posting some follow-up surveys. This is kind of for us to plan out any future coursework, but also get your feedback on this one. So yeah, we'll be in touch again.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks, Omar.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Of course. My pleasure.